Hi there. Welcome to the Business of Success, the podcast where growth isn't just a buzzword and success is anything but accidental. I'm your host, Parl Bhandari, award-winning CS leader and best-selling author, and I'm here to talk about what actually drives sustainable business: customer value, leadership, talent, community, and the systems behind companies that really, truly last. In each episode, I sit down with founders, operators, thinkers, and builders who are building success from the inside out. We go beyond the headlines and beyond the hype to unpack the real decisions, trade-offs, and frameworks that turn value into retention, growth, and impact. Because success isn't just about scaling faster, it's about building smarter. And if you're ready for honest conversations, practical insights, and a bit of a more human way to grow your business, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be back for another episode of The Business of Success. And with me is someone that I have had the pleasure to work with, but also have been admiring for many, many years, Princess Castleberry, CEO of Castleberry Global. And she is someone who helps not only spread the word of leadership and true business growth, but also is a speaker and is also a leadership consultant and coach. So you wear many, many hats. Welcome, Princess. For today, would love to hear your journey. I know that it's a varied one, and if someone were to pick up your new book, which we're going to dive into, they can learn a lot about it as well. But give us the highlights of you and what brought you to where you are today.
Well, as you know, where our worlds collide is in this vast industry of enterprise risk management. So I spent the first 22 years of my career as an enterprise risk manager. And, I like to sum that entire career up as I was a professional problem solver, right? Companies have different challenges and a lot of opportunities that they want to avail themselves to. And it was my job to help the business identify, assess, build, and learn either through those challenges or to put themselves in a position to avail themselves of certain opportunities. So I'm a professional problem solver, and I did that across several industries. I started off in insurance brokerage. I've worked in U.S. residential housing for Pulte Homes. And then I really grew up, as I'll say, and had my career take a lot of roots working for Kelly Services in the global staffing industry. And in that role in risk management, I got a chance to have my career span many functions. I've led and overseen global insurance programs. I have negotiated, I don't know how many contracts, and I've led business continuity, disaster response planning, cybersecurity awareness, and legislative risk mitigation. So just a few functions over my 22 years. But what I've been doing over the last few years is I've been working independently, started my own business, and I've really been helping leaders think through their leadership capacity and how it either creates opportunity or risks for the organization. Yeah. In a nutshell.
Just dabble in your careers. I love that about you because I think what I see in your career is very similar. I mean, I kind of feel this about myself too. When you've done different things and worn different hats, you really kind of build this career. It's truly
It is.
you grow and you build. And your book, and it's so interesting. So we're going to talk today about your book and look at all my little
Look at those tabs.
I was like, where to even go? But your book talks about your story, talks about your journey, which I love. And we're going to talk about your book. But also I went back, I listened to your TED Talk that you did a couple years ago. And I realized that TED Talk was, and obviously you probably knew this, like the foundation of what you've built, right?
Yeah.
It was the early probably start of that. You were saying the same messaging. You were talking about the same themes. So that's what I love to get into today. But
that whole talk, I gotta say this because so many of us talk about intentionality in leadership. And I will tell you, Pearl, that one of the biggest things that ever happened in my life started out in a really unintentional way, and it started with a problem. I wanted to get on stage, any stage, honestly, because in my small business, I was struggling with the sales process. I had come from corporate after all those years, and I'm out in the world trying to, clients and build relationships. And that is really tough when you don't have a lot of infrastructure around you. But I thought I had very unique ideas and approaches to solving different leadership problems. And if I could just get myself on stage, the people who wanted to work with me or hear from me would come to me. Getting on stage was my answer to like navigating the sales process and the brand awareness process. But what ended up happening for me is I got an opportunity to speak at TEDx Detroit through some networking connections. And I decided to go in a completely different direction once I found out I was going to have that opportunity. It was an opportunity for me to just pursue something completely different, which was a career in professional speaking and really teaching and educating from the stage. And I pivoted, the initial talk I had designed and with something that was more from the heart and from my lived experience. And that became the catalyst for everything that I'm doing today. So all of it was very unintentional, but has birthed, frameworks, leadership, keynotes, experiences, and now a book. So
I love to hear that. And I think that's very inspirational for those like myself building a business that are trying to kind of figure out their path, right? Like, how am I going to market? How am I going to grow? And you have always been very intentional as a leader. You've always guided and coached people. And honestly, this podcast is about building better from the inside out. And that's why I really approached you for this. You decided to write the book. And so let's dive in, because I'll be honest, it's like you said, it's a short book, but it's a how do you put it? You didn't put a slow burn, but that's what I'm
yeah,
going to call
I
it.
said it's a fast read, but a slow study.
Yes, fast read.
The other thing I say, because people can't see us on a podcast like this, people don't know I'm only 4'10", and so I also say the book is short and direct, just like me. So
It is, but it's meaty. I mean, I was just going to keep using Post-its, so I just said I'm just going to stop. Because I think you have so many rich concepts, and so I would love to dig in
sure.
to this, because I think then if people want to connect with you, they know, hey, you can be somebody that can come in for leadership coaching, or somebody that can come in for speaking engagement. Those are wonderful opportunities to work with you, but anyone can grab your book, which I love. So you can just go on Amazon, grab it. We'll put the link in the show notes. So tell us about, just really briefly, like, what made you go, I'm going to become an author next? Or did you already always know that?
No, so I did not know that. I developed this passion for speaking, right? For professional speaking. And when you're on stage, one of the biggest compliments you can ever get when you're off the stage is, oh my gosh, do you have a book? Or where are you going to be speaking next, right? And so I kept getting that question, do you have a book? Do you have a book? Because people wanted to go deeper on the concepts that I introduced on the stage. And so it started off, like most things in my life, as a dilemma, as a problem for me to solve. And I apply sort of risk management thinking to everything that I do, because I just think that those frameworks that we grew up on and work can be applied to anything in life. And so I started identifying that challenge, like, when people want something, what exactly do they want? And I said, you know what? They want to be able to recap those stories and have an opportunity to apply them to their lives. So that gave me, the basic framework. But then as I thought more and more, I thought about how people resonate, why people resonate. And it's because so many people are going through experiences where their capacity is challenged. We are actively, Pearl, in a leadership capacity crisis because, people are educated. We're highly educated. We're certified in every way possible, but we're still struggling with our decision making. We're still struggling to bring alignment in our teams, navigate healthy conflict, and then enter the world of artificial intelligence. And now we have entire systems that can outperform us in so many ways, but cannot fully replicate our humanity and our ability to take responsibility for consequences and actions. So now we're navigating all of that. And it's starting to get overwhelming. And the more I thought about it, I said, if people could just really tap in to what drives their decision making in the first place, if they know what triggers them, they could solve so many other problems related to conflict, the problems related to alignment and burnout. And so I wanted to take it all the way back to what I heard people saying the most, which is they just wanted to understand themselves better. And so The Truth is in the Trigger was born from that.
I mean, I can fully relate to the concepts that you shared as a leader, but even as like a business owner, when I'm juggling things, I think there's a lot in this book that you can take away. And I love the focus on action. So we're going to let's get into some of the stories and the frameworks, because there's a lot. So for those picking up the book, we will barely get through it all because there's just so much richness. So definitely recommend you pick up the book. Okay, so let's talk about, first of all, the Live, Lead, and Build framework for success. Walk us through this concept. How did you design it? Because That's how you open the book, right? So
Yeah.
to me, it feels like it is truly the beginning for somebody on their journey. So how did you sort of think this through and design it?
So first off, like the title of the framework, live, lead, and build leverage. When I thought about what I wanted to do, right? I want to live, I want to have a great life for myself and my family. I want to lead, not just in my home and my community, but out in the business world. But in order to be successful, I have to build leverage. There's a saying, Pearl, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I say, if it ain't broke, you better leverage it before you lose it, right? And so I came up with this idea of live, lead, build, leverage as a way to help leaders rethink and reimagine their capacity. And so the next question was, in my mind, what is draining leaders' capacity? What skills are creating the biggest gaps? And so I identified 6 skills. And then in my research, I looked at models of leadership, from some of the bigger companies, the McKinseys, the Gallups, the Korn Ferries, you name it. And I started looking at competency models and I just saw what was missing, like a true risk manager would. And I identified, six elements of leadership that I think help us stay focused. And the very first one, which this book is about, is that you identify the truth in your triggers, right? And that is what grounds us because we have to know what drives our behavior. That second one is that you align internally. Third is that you learn to disrupt your natural tendency for chronic stress and decision fatigue. Fourth is build belongers and believers. Belongers is not a word in the English language, but I made it up
I like
because the whole concept there is that, it's around psychological safety. People have to feel a sense of belonging to believe in you. But ultimately, that belonging and believing gets the leader influence. And so that is really about building influence. There's a fifth element of the framework: eliminate conflict waste. And conflict waste is the time, energy, and resources that we lose when conflict is avoided, mismanaged, or escalated too quickly. And the last part of it, the sixth element of this capacity builder, is that you integrate technology with discipline, not just head first, willy nilly, but that you integrate technology, especially AI, with discipline. And so, holistically, when I look at those 6 areas, those are the areas that I've seen become problematic for leaders, especially ones that are going through complex challenge and change. And I think simultaneously, those things are foundational, no matter if you're a seasoned leader or if you're just new to the game.
Yeah, and I love that you integrating technology with discipline because I feel like that is the world that we live in, and that world can create so many triggers on top of what we already live with. I went to a school talk at my talk with our principal actually the other day, and she said technology is there to constantly, either trigger you or feed you some kind of, kind of Pavlovian response, but in doing that, how do you guide your kids? How do you guide others? Right. And so if you're constantly consuming or not, I guess not intentionally consuming, right, then you can become a victim to that. So I just love that you built that into this framework because I think that's so relevant for leaders today, right? And one that
It
everyone.
all begins with your triggers. Like that the entire book, even though I do introduce live, lead, and build leverage in those 6 parts, the entire book is just about the first part, identifying the truth in your triggers, because that is what grounds you at every other stage of the framework.
And you share a risk management framework or like one that you sort of developed from your background in risk management, which is identify, assess, build, and learn. And I
Yes.
think that stood out to me because I think it's definitely one that we probably practice in other parts of our business lives, but do we ever turn the lens to ourselves, right? So I
Yeah,
love
that was a mock of that was a simplified version of the 5-part risk management process. Like, because I mean it. When I say that I have a risk manager's mindset, like I'm constantly, identifying and assessing, and prioritizing. We all are, right? And, we do it as parents, we do it as business leaders, entrepreneurs, all that. So we're constantly in risk management mode, like trying to identify problems or opportunities, assess them, likelihood and severity. And then we have to come up with a solution. Are we going to pursue it? What are we going to do? And so we have to build, right? Usually on the risk management side, you would go into analysis and some more complex steps. But at its base, You're just building. You're either collaborating with somebody or you're working alone and you're building a solution. And ultimately, you have to learn. You have to learn. And again, in the formal risk management process, you would go into monitoring and reporting and that whole sequence. But I just sum that up as learning. So it's just identify, assess, build, learn. And that is the simple approach I use to solve any challenge. I don't care how big or small. It's the same thing. Everything is risk management. Everything is solved the same way over and over again.
Yes. No, I found that just so simple and easy to apply, but obviously the act of taking the intentional steps to apply it is a key step. The part I think I resonated with the most is, I think honestly, the impact disconnect. One that I've personally struggled with. And I will say probably some of my least, what's the right word? Like the lowest moments almost are sometimes as a parent, right? When you've just gone through stressor, and then you aren't necessarily being yourself.
That's right.
I'm curious if you have, well, two things. One is, how do you handle it? Because you're a parent too. And how do you kind of tackle that? Two is, what have you seen in the folks that you've coached or people that you've met that are successful at overcoming this? And what are some steps that we could consider?
So first, like for your audience's benefit, if they haven't read the book, I'll frame it up a little bit. That in the book, I ask a simple question that I ask all of my audiences, which is in one word: how do you intend to make people feel? And when I ask people that question, Pearl, they usually say things like, I want people to feel heard, valued, seen, respected, loved, all these very, altruistic things. But then I flip that question and say, well, how do you actually make people feel when you're triggered and stressed? And I usually get a deep sigh and a pause. To your point, I've had to ask myself that many times as a parent. And when you get people grounded to that one word, and they have to simplify that in that moment, the heat of their stress and the height of their trigger, they behave very differently than they intend. It's very easy to ground them to that impact disconnect, because your impact is what you intend. That one word, that feeling, that tone that you want to set. But the reality is grounded in a very different way, especially if you're triggered. So I anchor people to that first and foremost, because in between those two words are all of your risks, your opportunities, and your influence. Your possibilities are all in there. And we live in a world where most people would say they are more likely to be triggered and stressed today. So that puts us at a higher likelihood and severity for getting the wrong type of behavior. And so that's a quick framing of what we're talking about. But the way that I start to address it, first off, that's my daily life as a parent. I want my children to be valued. I want them to have opinions, and I want them to feel seen and all of that. But when the dishes are dirty, damn it, I just want my kitchen clean. You know what I'm saying? I want them to do what I said. And I don't want to explain it. And I don't want to go through it, 3 times. And I don't want to have to come knock on your door. I want to say it once, and then I want it done. I want good grades. I want all these things. I want the fruit of my labor as a mother. And we don't always get that. So when things go wrong, now how are we going to maintain our intention, and how are we ultimately going to keep our stress at bay so that we continue to make good decisions? And the only way you do that is really identifying what is triggering you, what's taking you over the top, and putting strategies in place to start to protect your ability to make great decisions and stay intentional.
And we're being hard on the families right now, but I think a lot of it, when you are a parent, you have the best intentions, and that stress, may lead into your business life. And so as leaders, you're carrying a lot of things, right? And you're not just carrying the weight of work, you're carrying the weight of many, many different things. And I think you dive into some more concepts that are a bit like, deeper on this, which are like sinking ego, conflict waste, which is in the framework too. But I like those concepts because I feel like you say they're holding us back from success, right? Yeah. So, actually it's so funny. And back in that school talk I went to yesterday, we were able to communicate about certain scenarios, and I wanted to ask a question candidly, but at the same time, I'm like surrounded by other parents. So I'm like filtering my question because I don't want to make my family sound crazy, right? But realistically, I think that it was technically it was ego that was holding me back from getting to the truth of whatever I need in that scenario. And that wasn't a high stress scenario. It was pretty low stress, but
Yeah.
I just use it as an example because it held me back. Right. And I think you talk about all these elements that do hold us back from success. Can you share a bit more about where did you like originate these concepts, and how do you teach action on these concepts as well? Because I know that throughout the book, and for everyone that is going to read it, it's packed with action. The whole second half is what do you go and do about it, right? And the questions that you ask. But just for the sake of the podcast, would love to have.
Yeah. So the overall framing is that the book is not meant to be exhaustive, right? It's not meant to tackle every scenario. I tackle the scenarios I've experienced in life. And because I am an endless creative, I come up with my own terms, right? But just know that as you're reading the book, there is real psychology underpinning these concepts, even if I call them something cheeky or something creative. So the book talks about 4 hidden behaviors. And these are behaviors that I've seen over and over a lot of leaders exhibit, that if they don't slow down long enough to like really identify what's going on and what's driving these behaviors can impede success. So the first one that I introduce is this concept called toxic drive. And that is born out of, talking about ego. Toxic drive is born out of seeking an excessive amount of validation, right? It's okay. We know it's wonderful to have a high positive drive towards your goals. But when sometimes our goals are triggered by a need to prove somebody wrong, right? Sometimes it's a parent, it's a sibling, it's an ex, it's a boss. Like what I experienced early on in my career, you can get people basically hating on you and making you feel like you're not good enough to do the things that you want to do. And some of us, instead of just going forward confidently and finding the courage to move forward, we go into overdrive and we are like dead set on proving them wrong. And what happens initially is you get this full throttle of energy and ingenuity, which is a term in psychology. There's a concept called ego defense.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody says you can't do something that you believe in your heart you can do, your ego will kick up a few notches and defend itself. And you will get bursts of creativity and energy. But what happens and what turns the drive toxic is that you end up in a place that you don't recognize. You're taking on goals and tasks that you never really imagined for yourself and you really don't want to do, all in the vein of continuing to prove that person wrong or quiet the naysayers. And you can, as a leader, find yourself in a very inauthentic place. And when your ego is whipped up and you're in toxic drive and seeking that endless validation, you can start to overwork yourself. And that goes into that second concept that I raise in the book called sinking ego. So imagine your ego is built up and whipped all the way up. You're working in full throttle. Now, when you're up there, it's really difficult to let go of your decision making. Now, you've built all this success and you're growing so fast. And we know to scale anything, especially as business owners, you need other people. But guess what happens when your ego is so tied to your decision making and your ego is in full throttle? It is very difficult to let go of decisions because now you don't trust anybody. And you can't be honest about where your drive comes from. You can never ever tell anybody who you want to work overtime with you that you're trying to, beat your ex, in the kid wars. That's not going to happen. You can't do that. Or that you're trying to prove your daddy wrong because he said you weren't going to amount to something. Nobody's going to be down for the cause for that. And so leaders end up in a very lonely place where their ego starts to sink because they're now making too many decisions. They can't delegate. They can't deliberate with other people. They can't let go of ownership. And so they sink with their bad decisions because inevitably, after making so many sustained complex decisions, decision fatigue will set in. You will succumb to the natural psychological phenomenon and your decision quality will go down. And so I call it the sinking ego. And the book continues on. We won't give it all away.
Yeah, we won't give it all.
But those two go together so well. Like, so many people can relate to toxic drive. And again, me calling it toxic drive or sinking ego is not meant for people to label themselves or diagnose themselves in any way. That's not at all what I want to do. I don't want anybody walking around saying, I have sinking ego. I just want them to have some color and context and some language around how they're feeling. so that they can go have meaningful discussions. It's not to be able to label themselves or other people, in a particular way. It's just a way to creatively call a thing. And, it's just my own creative spin, my own license on it.
I know. I like I like giving it labels just to have a grounding purpose. Like toxic drive, I mean, that one, you didn't even define that one. I think anyone can understand and assume what that is. And I'm kind of curious. So you're out there doing talks with companies, right? I think a lot of this is rooted in some of the insecurity that comes from our roles as leaders, like what we're asked to do, what we're not asked to do, how, oh, we need to downsize your team, or, oh, we need to do this. Like there's a lot of challenges that leaders face constantly that are going to trigger them. No matter what you say, they're going to cause triggers. How can companies, like when you're out there, doing a talk for a company, how can companies better take steps towards, I would say, awareness, right? Or help empower leaders? Because I will tell you, like I was in probably a state of toxic drive working at a company when I actually was trying to prove I could do it as a new mom. Like I remember I was fresh new mom, sleep deprived. And people even told me like, you're sleep deprived. I'm like, I know, but I could do it. And I was working in the day and I was working in the night and, just doing the thing that many of us have done. And the company said to me, yeah, you seem like you're really tired, go take a nap. I was like, okay. But when I actually tried to step out of responsibility, I remember I was told, who's going to do your leadership work then? Right. So the answer wasn't go take a nap and that's going to be better. I knew that. I knew I needed to take actual steps to but they didn't necessarily afford me that. So I'm kind of curious, how do you coach companies, right, on this? Because obviously we can do it our best, but.
Well, the first thing I do is frame it as a risk management issue. Companies pay attention when you frame things in terms of it impacting their people, their purpose, and their profits. And ultimately, sometimes we hate to admit it that a lot of this information stops where the buck stops, right? And so especially over the last few years after the pandemic, we started to frame everything as a wellness challenge and a wellness initiative. And what we did find, and I was so happy to have this, that a lot of companies are concerned with wellness and well-being, organizational health, and they made significant investment in it. But I am still a little bit critical in that they didn't always create the systems that promoted what the program said. Like the example that you just gave, they would call out. So they had the awareness to know that, okay, there's something wrong with you. There's something wrong, not with you, but with your circumstance. Yeah. You're tired. You're a new mom. Give yourself some grace. So they knew the words to say. They had enough awareness, self and situational awareness to call it out and call a thing. But then they did not have the systems in place to undergird that decision to give you some relief, to grant you some relief, and to allow you space to recover. They don't have that. And so I present these systems, these recovery systems, as just as important as ergonomic systems. And I know that's your word.
Yeah.
These systems of recovery, these practices around recovery, these practices around self and situational awareness as part of their risk management strategy. Right. And as part of something, when I'm talking to individual leaders or to teams, these challenges are challenges that impact decision making and decision quality. And when you frame it that way, it gets people's attention because I can tie dollar amounts and values to decision quality and execution time and things like that. So when these conversations are framed as wellness, it's really hard to put a real significant metric to it. Because one of the things that they measure in terms of wellness, they'll look at like absenteeism, like days, sick days and lost time and things like that. But you just talked about that. Real leaders aren't making the company lose time. You're showing up every day, burnt out, burnt up, and pushing through. So you're not losing time. So one of the metrics that they're watching isn't going to prove a thing, but decision quality. The quality of your decisions. If you can get companies to identify exactly how they measure the quality of a decision, the quality of their execution, now you start to get them to tie some of these factors to things that they really care about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. No, I like that. Right, go ahead. And I like that it's more of a metric. And I think probably down the road, you're also looking at retention, right? As something that's going to suffer. And actual costs of onboarding and, all that will go up. So I love putting it into a cost framework.
Yeah, you have to. You have to. I hate to reduce it down to cost, but that's what gets attention. I mean, in an organization, and leaders are responsible for costs and for profitability and for execution. So we have to speak in the language that is most important to clients. And that's the beauty of this. There's so many ways to measure the success of these types of programs. And I bring clients into that process. I don't want to tell you what the ROI should be. What are you looking to accomplish? And where could better decision making quality impact that? You tell me. And that's how we get to it.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And so my biggest takeaway, and I know that we're going to encourage everyone to grab this book because as you can see, there's a lot to it. And I'm
going to get a partnership going with Post-it because
yes,
really I need to have some branded Post-its for the book because
that would be very cool. You can add that as a little add-on. I love that. But no, it's nice to things I wanted to come back to. And I actually did reference your book in a conversation I was having this morning, and I had it. My Post-its helped me get to quickly the page I wanted to. So I was very glad about that. My biggest takeaway and why I really wanted to talk about this on this podcast is if you are trying to build growth and build a company that is sustainable, burnt out leaders are not going to get you there. Burnt out leaders are going to burn your growth, right? They're going to make decisions. They're going to, struggle when they don't have to necessarily. So empowering them with these tools can really help. What can you share with us? Like, obviously this is your baby, but what is one sort of maybe of your lessons from you're doing these talks now? What is one of the biggest lessons that you've learned from now sharing this out with the world? What's one takeaway that you've heard from folks that you'd love to share with the audience?
So first and foremost, there is a really cool trigger mapping exercise that's in the book. And then I care so much about that even if you didn't read the book, you can get the trigger mapping exercise on my website. Just go get it. It's free.
Go get it.
Because the biggest takeaway is that people have never really thought about the different types of triggers that they experience. The personal triggers, which are the things that shape your own identity, right? All of your lived experiences. The global triggers, which are all the isms and phobias of society, the things that are in the world surrounding us that intersect with our identities. And then that third category, our professional environment triggers. That's where all the symptoms and signs of triggers show up. That's where the conflict shows up, the disagreement, the microaggressions. And you think they originated there because you spend so much of your time at work. And so the main thing people tell me is that, wow, I never really connected what that disagreement I had with my colleague back to a pattern of behavior or disagreement I had with my parents. And thank you for helping me see that, because they realize they're overreacting in certain moments, not to diminish the consequence of, things that happen in the workplace. Some very serious things happen in the workplace and everything isn't your fault. But to have the power as a leader to show up and meet the moment with the level of energy and response and capacity that it takes to respond in the moment, and not be bringing the full weight of society's ills and your childhood, to a situation, that really is empowering, and it gives people a release. And so the biggest thing is that trigger mapping exercise and just really thinking through their behaviors in a way that they've never really been called to do.
Yes. And you said anyone can get that. And your website is www.princesscastleberry.com. So go and check that out. And, I think, again, as you said, it's not a heavy read. It's not a long book, but there's so many pages.
It's a very fast read if you're the type of person that just wants to read a book through. If you want to apply this to your life, you're going to need 40 tabs. You're going to have to slow down. And it's just an invitation. The book is not a mandate. It's not heavy. It just gives you a very practical way of looking at your life, your capacity, and what those opportunities are, right? Like I said, your impact gap, right? That everything in the middle between how you intend to show up and how you actually show up when you're triggered is where all your risks, your opportunities, and your influence lie.
I love that. So let's end on that. And thank you so much, Princess, for this conversation. I love chatting with you all the time as just a person and a personal mentor, but now to have you as a guest on this podcast has really just been wonderful. So thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Pearl.
All right. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to The Business of Success. If today's conversation sparked a new way of thinking about growth, value, talent, leadership, don't forget to follow along and share this episode with someone who is building something meaningful. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Customer X Success, which is helping organizations design customer value, build better and higher impact teams, and turn success into a growth strategy. You can learn more about Customer X Success at www.customerxsuccess.com. I'm Parul Bhandari, and this is The Business of Success, where success is built, not just chased. Until next time, see you soon.